Let's have a quick overview of the custom dash electronics in this car. Now, first of all, let's take a look at the individual sections of the dash and identify what they are and what they do. This dash, the first thing, or one of the first things you'll notice, is that the lettering is not authentic to the TV car. And that's deliberate because all of the modules on this dash are fully functional. So what I wanted to do was have lettering which represents the actual function of the gauges, not just a replication of what's on the TV car. So let's look at each section of the dash in turn. On the left hand side we have the compass board, which we'll refer to as dash module number 1 or DM1. It has some arrowhead indicator LEDs and some bar graph displays. Moving to the right we have this module, which is referred to as dash module number 2 or DM2, and this incorporates the speedometer as a numeric digital display and as a bar gauge display, in addition to telltale repeaters for the left turn, the right turn and the high beam indicator. We have another 4-digit 7-segment display there, which can be used as a trip meter or to display various sensors such as temperature, fuel or supply voltage. These bar gauges represent temperature, engine temperature and fuel. I think on the TV car they're labelled signal and tuning. We have a number of red-green indicator pairs here, and we'll see what they do later in the video, and we have an odometer which is also can be used as a message centre. I'm going through this quite quickly because the functionality of this dash is far too much to incorporate in one video, so I'm going to just give a very quick overview of what each module does. This section in the middle is still to be incorporated. I'm working on that now. This is dash module number 3, or the voice display, and on the top of the dash there we have the countdown sequence, which is currently on order from our friends at Knight Rider Historians. We sometimes refer to those as dash top indicators or DTIs. Moving to the right of the steering column we have dash module number 4 or DM4, which is the tacho display, and at the extreme right we have a dash module number 5 or DM5, which incorporates a number of gauges including battery voltage, throttle position, air temperature, and some various indicators at the bottom here as well. Now we have the display, a single screen display, which is actually an LCD touchscreen. I'll put the part number below. It's Lilliput is the manufacturer, and it's model UM80. It's a touch sensitive LCD screen. It takes all its inputs and its power from a single mini USB connector, so you can hook up a laptop to that. And on the either side of the steering column we have switch pods marked with functions which control the various operating modes of the dash modules. Now the dash modules each, in addition to the normal operating mode, they each have some different operating modes, including a show mode, which just cycles the displays for making the displays active, for example at car shows, output test modes to enable the each LED to be tested, and input test modes to make sure that each module can see all of its inputs. So let's go ahead and power up the dash, and we'll power up the dash in normal running mode. To go into normal running mode, just don't press any of the buttons on the switch pods and turn the ignition key to the on position. And you will see that the compass is actually indicating about north at the moment. There's a little module down there which is the compass sender module, and it has 2 buttons on it. The one on the left hand side, if you push it and release it, it'll put the compass into a show mode, which just cycles round like that. Press it again and it'll go back into normal functional mode, which is just slightly west of north right now. We have the speedo, which is obviously 0 right now because we're not moving. The odometer can represent kilometres or miles. Now, because it's not possible to represent a K for kilometres or an M for miles on the message display, I've used a C to represent kilometres and a U to represent miles. Why a C and a U? Well, Canada uses kilometres, so I'll put a C for kilometres, and the United States uses U for miles, so I'll put a U if that's in miles mode. This display at the top here Let's put the left turn signal on, and you can see that there's the right one. Okay, so there's something that I've got to look at. The indicator isn't flashing, probably because the voltage is low. I'll look at that shortly. What else have we got here? That 4-digit display, we can change the display, the function of that, by pressing push button number 1 for DM2 on the switch pod. So that's this one here. So if I push and release that, it'll change it to temperature and then to voltage. Again, it's not possible to display a V on a 7-segment display, so I've put U for volts. It's 12 volts right now. And this can go through a number of different inputs. These are spare inputs, which can be taken through the serial bus. And we have a show mode. We have a direct access mode. And we have a trip meter. Okay. Let's move on to dash module number 4, which is the engine tacho. The engine's not running, so we've got nothing on there. Battery voltage is there. And these gauges, each one of these gauges can be fully functional, or it can be in a show mode. So if you don't want to hook up all of the sensors, you can put each individual gauge into show mode. And the throttle position sensor and the air temperature sensor are actually in show mode right now. Those normal and power indicators, the power indicator just indicates there's 12 volts there, and if it goes out of range, if it goes below 10 volts or above 15 volts, that power indicator will flash rapidly, indicating that there's a fault. Here, these buttons on the center console, this one represents normal or pursuit, or normal or auto mode. So if I just press that, it'll change between normal and auto. And if I press this one here, the pursuit button, that'll put the pursuit light on. The headlights now and the side lights or park lights are controlled from here. They used to be controlled by a switch, by a connector on the stock dash, and we'll see where that was when I show you the what the dash looks like with the custom dash removed in a little while. But right now the side lights are controlled there and the headlights are controlled there. You can probably hear the motor going up and down. Okay, so I think that covers a quick overview of the dash displays. Since we've got a little bit of time, let's just have a look at putting each one of these modules into show mode. As we've said, the compass display can be put into show mode by pressing that button on the compass sender. Alternatively, it can be put into show mode by a long, when I say a long press of each of these push buttons, I mean hold it down for more than 2 seconds. The software in these modules is configured so that it does different things depending if you do a short press or a long press. If we do a long press of push button number 2 for DM1, again it'll go into show mode, but this is a show mode generated by the module itself rather than by the sender module. The long press again will toggle it back to functional mode. Let's now do a long press of push button number 2 for DM2. I'm going to put that into show mode, and it just cycles the speed at all the displays, the gauges, and puts a number of messages up on the odometer display there. So press and release again. This is push button number 2 for DM2. Press and release. So you press and hold it until it beeps. That goes back into normal running mode. Dash module number 4. So again we have our dash module number 4, push button 1 and push button 2. Let's press and hold push button number 2 for 2 seconds. And it will go into show mode. You can hear that clicking sound as well that we've used to replicate the sound. That's optional, you can switch that on or off. Press and hold again for 2 seconds, and it goes back into normal running mode. Dash module number 5, similar kind of thing. Push and hold push button number 2 for DM5, and the whole thing will go into show mode. And push and hold it again for 2 seconds, and we're back to normal running mode. DM2, I said what that does. That's changing the 4-digit display. See, I've given this so many functions that I've forgotten myself what they do now. Okay, that's fuel display. That character at the end is not a faulty display. It's supposed to represent a G for gallons. That's the best I can do on a 7-segment display to represent a G. If I push and hold push button number 1, it'll change the display to litres, so that's about 0.9 litres. So a short press toggles the function, and a long press toggles the unit. So 24 centigrade, long press, 76 Fahrenheit. Short press goes to voltage. There's only one set of units for voltage, that's volts. Press again, you go through these different inputs. That's a show mode. That's miles. Okay, so that's a short press of push button number 2, puts the display into miles. So 43,480 miles, or 69,568 kilometers. Okay, dash module number 5, we can change the functions in a similar way. Short press on push button 2 goes through. These ones with 3 lines or 2 lines or 1 line at the end are optional inputs from a serial input bus. That's a show mode. That's a direct display access mode, so you can send information to switch the individual segments on and off. That's the throttle position in percent. That's the outside air temperature. Again, you can change it to centigrade. That's obviously not calibrated. It's not 67 centigrade, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting in here. So that's probably because I've not connected the sensor yet, or it needs calibrating. Okay, so there's a quick overview of the functions of the dash. What we'll do now is we'll take a look at the dash. We'll take a look at the car with the dash removed, and we'll take a look at the wiring on the dash itself. But before we do that, let's just have a look at the controls for the scanner unit on the front of the car, which is characteristic Knight Rider. One of the most recognisable features of the car, and that's controlled by this these controls on this panel here. This is the main on-off switch, and we can control the speed by this control here. I'll have to do it with my left hand, otherwise you won't see the display. This LED display on here is just so that you can see the speed of it. The real scanner, which I'll show you in a moment, has 55-watt halogen bulbs, so it's very bright even in daylight. This AOE, all on effect, just puts all of the LEDs on for a moment, which you can vary the time by turning that control, all on effect time, which you sometimes see on the car. Let's just go around front of the car and take a look at the scanning light. So we can see that they're 55-watt halogen bulbs, which are quite bright in the daylight. Okay, so we've looked at normal running mode and show mode for each of the 4 modules that we have fitted. Let's just have a quick look at some of the other operating modes. One of the other operating modes is output test mode, and you can get into output test mode for any of the modules by holding in the SW1 switch for the corresponding module. So let's try DM2. So if we hold that in and power up at the same time, I might have to put the camera down for a moment while I do that. So I'm going to hold down DM2 switch 1 and switch the ignition on. Bear with me a second. Okay, so when we do that, you'll see that the display just shows NOR for normal mode. Now if I press push button number 1 for this module, do short presses, that's less than 2 seconds, and release, it will cycle through show mode. This is menu mode that we call this. Output test mode, input test mode, and back to normal mode. So you can press short presses of push button number 1 until the desired mode is showing. When the desired mode is showing, for example output test, then we do a short press of push button number 2 for the corresponding module, and it will put it into output test mode. Now output test mode tests each LED, each display element, to make sure that it's working, so it'll cycle through each individual segment of each digit of that 7-segment display, so you can check that each segment is working properly. So here's the odometer display, here's the 4-digit display, here's the bar gauges being checked. Those indicators, each segment of the MPH display. Just doing these now, a little bit too much daylight to see what's going on there. Then we'll put the whole display on, every element of every display, and we vary the brightness. Then we just do the LEDs and the bar gauges, and vary the brightness. And then the LED light bars, and vary the brightness. And then we test the tone generator, which can generate a number of different audio tones. And then it goes back around again. So we can have a similar thing with the other dash module. So I'll just pause it, and then what I'll do is I'll pause the video, and then I shall power up holding push button, or sorry, SW1 for DM4 in, which is that one down there. So again, bear with me a second. Okay, so you can see that now that I've powered up holding SW1 down for DM4, now the numeric display for DM4 is displaying a menu, and short presses of push button number 1 cycles the display. We get to output test mode and we press push button number 2, and we have a similar kind of thing. We test each segment of each display to make sure everything's working, each of the light bars, it's just getting to that brightness where the sunlight's on it, so it's not clear on this video to see. Just a number of different patterns. Taco arc. And a reverse taco arc. I've no idea why you would ever want to do that, but just because we can, so why not? And then similar kind of thing, all the elements on, vary the brightness. I'm just going to pause that because it's the same as the other, and then I'll show you the same thing with DM5. So I'm going to power up with SW1 of DM5 held in. And as you might expect, normal mode, I'm going to press short presses of push button number 1 for DM5 to cycle to show mode, output test mode, and select it. And we check each of the elements again, and it's all very similar to the other modules. Cycle through the LEDs, check the tone generator, check that everything can come on, vary the brightness. Finally, I suppose I should show DM1 doing the same thing. Now DM1 doesn't have a digital display, so how do we show the various modes? Well, the N arrow I use for normal mode, because N stands for normal as well as north. Okay. S stands for show mode as well as south. Output test mode is the left marked arrow because it's pointing to the outside of the car. And input test mode is the right facing arrow because it's pointing to the inside of the car. So normal mode, show mode, output test mode. And select it. And it will make sure that each LED can be illuminated individually. And as a gauge. And as a reverse gauge. And various patterns just because we can. Okay. Finally, the horn button is now either here or here. Let's just do a quick input test mode on one of these modules. Okay, so DM2 I've put into menu mode, and let's go show mode, output test mode, input test mode, and select it. Now input test mode. This is showing the hexadecimal values, so that's a number from 0 to FF for each of the analog inputs. These two here represent potentiometers that can be connected to vary the brightness. This car doesn't have the potentiometers connected, but it's very easy to connect them on the terminal blocks underneath. So if you have no potentiometers connected, the displays will be on maximum brightness. These sections here represent the reading coming from the fuel gauge, the temperature gauge, and the voltage. And these bar gauges also represent the potentiometers. If we had potentiometers connected, then varying them would change these gauges and change those numerics there. Let's take this opportunity while the dash is out, while the custom Knight Rider dash is out, to look at the wiring behind the dash. That is the wiring that's been put in specifically to drive the custom Knight Rider dash. Now the stock dash has been removed altogether, as you can see. We see here the connectors still from the stock lighting switch. There's a switch that switches the headlights and the park lights on and off on the left side, and there's a dimmer control switch on the right side. The reason I've kept those, the connectors there, is because I'm going to use this dimmer switch to take off a lighting feed to drive the switch pods. And the way we do that is by looking at these individual pins here. You'll see there are actually 4 pins on this right hand connection. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the main lighting input, which comes on whether you've got the headlights or the park lights, also known as side lights on, is a brown wire which comes in on the bottom, and that goes through a variable resistor in that dimmer switch and comes out on a dark green wire on the top. That then goes through a fuse in the fuse box labelled INST for instruments, and then goes out to all the, it used to come out to all the instrument illumination, which of course we don't have anymore because we have the custom dash in. So we don't really need dimmed illumination anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a wire and jump it between that bottom pin and the top pin, and then I'm going to take a fused output from that connection to the switch pods which need illumination. Also behind the dash we have that black module there, which actually contains relays now for performing the function that used to be performed by that stock lighting switch. We now control the headlights and the side lights by these switches here on the center console. These are just low current switches with a ground switched connection for side lights or park lights and headlights, and those low switched connections go off to this relay module here, and then the outputs drive the lights. We see the scanner control unit behind the dash as well. That's this blue circuit board here. This connection on the right side takes all of the control signals from this panel here. That's the on-off control and the all-on effect control, and it also has the low current outputs to drive this row of LEDs to check the speed and the fact that it's working. The main outputs to the light bar under the hood are taken from this 9-way connector here, which I've currently disconnected, but that can just clip onto there, drive the actual scanner light. We have a power feed here taken off from continuous power and goes to the that relay, the other side of which is the main power supply to this board, and that relay is controlled by a ground switched wire on that green connection, which is just switched to ground by that on-off switch there. We have also behind the dash a number of D-type connectors to each of the dash modules. A 9-way connector to dash module number 1, which is also connected on its other end to this module here, which is the functional compass sender. We have a 25-way connector which connects to dash module number 2, that is the speedo board. We have a 9-way connector which is going to connect the dash module number 3, that is the voice display. And we have a phono connection, RCA phono type connector, to put an audio input from a source, an audio source such as the stereo, into the voice modulator. And of course the voice modulator can either take that audio input, or it can take a microphone input just to directly respond to a voice. We also have connections, 15-way connections for dash module number 4, the tacho, and dash module number 5, which is the power board, which sits on the right hand side there. These two hanging connections here are connections to the horn, and they're just going to connect to one of the wires, one of the buttons on the switch pod. And finally we have all of these connections which will go to the stereo. We have a red power connection, a black ground connection, a yellow switched power to the radio, so that's continuous power. This is switch power, which comes on when the accessory switch, when the ignition is in the accessory position or the run position. We have a brown wire, which is the lights switch, and we have the grey wire, which is the dimmed illumination. But as we said earlier, those two are joined together now via a link on that dimmer switch. So you could tie one of those back as they're the same thing, just a lighting indication either. Just to use the brown one and tie the grey one back. We'll use the grey one, it doesn't really matter because they're connected together. We also have the phono connection there to take the output from the stereo and feed it into the voice display. And I think that covers all of the stock wiring connections behind the dash. You might have noticed two wires here which aren't going anywhere, and the reason for that, I'm going to tie those back, is they're just additional wires which I thought I might use on the dashboard, but this version of the dash doesn't use them. The yellow wire is from the fasten belts indication, which comes from the convenience centre mounted under the dash. That's just a high switched signal when it's reminding you to fasten the belts. And that purple connection is an output from indicating that the engine is being cranked. You can disconnect that altogether by removing the fuse marked crank in the fuse box, or just tie it back. I'm going to tie those back because we're not going to use those in this vehicle at the current time. Now, before the dash goes back in, this is also a good opportunity while the dash is still out to show the wiring between the various components of the dash and the switch pods. So you can see that all of these dash modules have a D-type connector in addition to a number of terminal block connections, not many of which are actually used. So these terminal block connections are numbered on each module from 1 on the left side to 37 on the right side. You'll notice that on each one of these modules there is a link between pins 26 and 27. I still have to put the link in to dash module number 5, and the reason for that is to use the onboard speaker for audio tones. If you don't put that link in, then you can connect to an external speaker for any of these modules. Connected to the terminal blocks also, in each case, are a white wire which corresponds to a switch to put each module into menu mode when it's powered up, and 2 push buttons numbered B1 and B2. The B1 is a yellow wire and B2 is always a blue wire, and those are for controlling mode selection and various other functions, the details of which we'll cover when we look at the operation of the individual dash modules. They don't always go on the same pin on each module, and the reason for that is because each module has a different combination of high switched inputs and low switched inputs, so they do end up on different pins. But I've actually marked on the terminal blocks which ones are switch, that's the white wire, B1, which is the yellow wire, and B2, which is the blue wire. Dash module number 2, which is the speedo, and dash module number 4, which is the tacho, also have takeoffs from the power supply, 12 volts and ground, to supply power to the corresponding switch pods. So the left-hand switch pod takes its power from the output on dash module number 2, and those connections there are just wired in parallel with the power supplies on the D-type connectors. So that's just an extra connection. And the power for the right-hand switch pod is taken off from DM4 there. Dash module number 3 at the time of filming isn't actually fitted yet, but when it is, again these 3 wires for the menu mode switch and the 2 push buttons will go into a terminal block on the back of dash module number 3. These black wires hanging down here are for the horn. They're actually connected on the left hand switch pod to the bottom switch in there. All of the other switches on the switch pods, apart from the horn switch, are for controlling the push buttons and the switches to each dash module. The top switch on each of the switch pods isn't wired to anything, but I do bring out the connections on a pair of green wires so that can be used in the future for anything you care to connect it to. Now, since those top switches are correspond to the position on the switch pods, which has the top switch, which is the bottom as you look at it because its dash is upside down, correspond to this switch here, you might want to hook that up to a relay module to control the indicators as an alternative to controlling it from the indicator stalk. This pair of yellow wires here is for the illumination feed to the switch pods, and that's just going to pick up from the stock lighting connected behind the dash that we'll talk about a little later in the video. Also behind the dash we have this LCD touchscreen monitor, which is a Lilliput UM80 module, and it's a touch sensitive version. I'll put a link to the details of that in the video below as well. And the main connection to it is just a mini USB connector. So through that mini USB connector it gets power and it gets the signal, which can be taken from a laptop or a camera, whatever you want to plug into there. There's also a alternative power supply connector there, but you don't actually need that because you can take power through the USB connector. Looking a little closer at the back of these switch pods, you'll see that each of the switch pods, the switches themselves are wired independently of the LEDs on either side, but the LEDs on either side can be made to be on or off by the position of this jumper. This car is configured with all of them on, except these top ones, which correspond to the arrowhead markers on each of the switch pods. To put a switch, to put an LED off, just take this jumper off and put it on the other position. So that's an off position. You could just leave the header off altogether if you don't want an LED on, but I just put a pin there so that you don't lose the header. So let's keep all of those on, and any of the LEDs that's not on will come on dimly when the car lights are on, just so that you can see the function.